Hello and welcome to today's lesson. Today's lesson is about indirect objects and direct objects. Indirect objects and direct objects. And more specifically, it's about a type of verb that we call ditransitive verbs. That may seem like a big word, but I will explain it in one moment. Ditransitive verb. A ditransitive verb is a verb that in English it needs an object. The object is the noun in the sentence. That experiences the verb action. That's the definition of the object of the sentence. So in this case, ditransitive verbs need an object and an indirect object. I'm going to shorten that with IO, an indirect object. An indirect object is the noun, or sometimes pronoun, in the sentence that receives the object. Or benefits from the action. Okay, so now we have the definition of indirect object and object. So let's take a look at an example. An example here is Paul gave Tiana a puppy. Let's break this down. Paul is what we call the subject of the sentence. Gave is our verb, and it's in the past tense. Give is a verb that is ditransitive, so it needs both an object and an indirect object. Here, Tiana is the indirect object because Tiana is receiving the benefit of the action. She's receiving the puppy, and the puppy is our object. So in English, we can do something that's a little unique. We can go subject plus verb plus indirect object plus object. So it's a little unique, the order here in English. And give is one of those words that needs both. Give needs both an indirect object and a direct object. So it needs both. Some other common verbs that need both are get, so let me give you an example with this one. He got me some water. And here let's just break it down. He is our subject, got is our verb, me indirect object, the thing receiving the direct object. So here's our direct object. This is what is being given. So let's take a look now at some common mistakes that people make when confusing how to use the direct and indirect object. So these are some common mistakes. Let's take a look at some examples. So my mother was so considerate, she always gave them some. Here, what's missing is our object, our direct object. And the question is, what did she give the neighbors? What did she give the neighbors? So we're missing the object. We have the indirect object here, the benefit, these are the people receiving, but we don't know what they are receiving. So this is a common mistake. So we need something. We need to know something that your mother is giving. Let's look at another example. Whenever my mother made cookies, she always gave the cookies. In this sentence, we're missing the indirect object. We're missing the indirect object. And the question is, who? Who received the cookies? I don't know. This sentence doesn't tell me. Whenever my mother made cookies, she always gave the cookies. But to who? Who did she give the cookies? So in this case, we're missing the indirect object. She always gave the neighbors the cookies. So that's what we're missing in that sentence. Let's take a look at one final example. Whenever my mother made cookies, we're going to stay with the same example. Whenever my mother made cookies, she always gave my neighbors. She always gave my neighbors. Now, this sentence is a little bit complicated. I know here we state cookies, so we know what your mother is giving. But give must be followed by the indirect and direct object. Must be followed by the indirect and direct object. So in this case, even though you stated cookies here, and you have my neighbors here, which is your indirect object, you still have to state cookies again here. The reason is because it's a compound sentence. This is a compound sentence. And really, it's two separate ideas. The first one is, my mother made cookies. And the second idea is, she always gave the neighbors cookies. So because it's a compound sentence, this sentence here is a compound sentence, there's two separate ideas. The first one, my mother made cookies. The second one, she always gave the neighbors cookies. So in order to combine these two, what we need is a pronoun here. So the correct sentence would be, whenever my mother made cookies, she always gave my neighbors, and then here you need a pronoun, some. Some refers back to cookies because after give, we need the indirect object, which is here, my neighbors, receiving the cookies, receiving the benefit of the verb, and we need the direct object. In this case, it's our pronoun because it's referring back to cookies, which we stated earlier in the sentence. So, one last thing with direct and indirect objects and verbs that use both the direct and indirect object. Some verbs that a student brought up just recently, like walk, usually doesn't have an indirect object. But in some sentences, like the following sentence, which my student couldn't understand, Jose walks Maria to school every morning. Jose walks Maria to school every morning. My student couldn't understand this because usually walk doesn't have an indirect object, but in this case it does. Maria is your indirect object. She's receiving the benefit of the walk. She's receiving the benefit of the walk. This sentence doesn't have a direct object. So this means that Jose, the father, yes, takes Maria, the daughter, and walks with her together to the school. She walks together to the school. Another example is, I walk my dog every day. So in this case, my dog receives the benefit of the verb walk. So my dog receives the benefit of the walk. I walk my dog every day. So, and sometimes there might be a verb like walk, also feed, where there usually isn't an indirect object, but in some circumstances we use an indirect object to indicate what we mean. I hope this helps. I know it's a bit of a complicated subject, but if you have any questions, you can always take one of our classes. Thanks and have a good day.